know that we are recording this webinar. It will be posted within 48 minutes of, or 48 hours of the broadcast. So watch for an email to let you know that when it's available. And just to let you know, we've disabled hand raising because we want to have a record of all questions. So be sure to type them throughout the broadcast. And to help ensure a pleasant listening experience for all, microphones have been muted for all attendees. We have a lot of ground to cover today, so we will do our best to answer questions at the end of the presentation. So just to get us started, I wanted to ask you a poll question, and that is, does your company use Energistics standards today? And you can check all that apply. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this and give you a few minutes to, or a few seconds to answer. Alrighty, responses are coming in. And while you're doing that, I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Lisa Towery, Geological Modeling Advisor for BP. Lisa has been in the oil and gas industry for over 25 years. For the majority of her career with BP, her work is focused primarily on geological reservoir modeling. Lisa's been involved with numerous integrated teams delivering reservoir models across a variety of geological settings and geographic regions. And Lisa is currently a technical advisor in BP's Subsurface Technical Center, leading the static reservoir modeling community of practice. And again, my name is Jana Shea. I'm responsible for strategic planning, defining our operational and adoption goals, as well as delivery, managing execution of deliverables through our staff and members, and engaging with our external standards organizations. So I definitely would like to welcome you, and we'll go ahead and close the poll. So 55% use RESQML, 74% of attendees use WIPSML, 26 ProdML, and 42% ETP, so that's good news. And then we have a number of other standards, so thank you very much for taking a few moments to answer the poll. Okay, so I've introduced our presenter. And so today we'll be covering just very briefly about Energistics, and then we'll turn our attention to RESQML and putting RESQML to work, and then we will have a Q&A session. So please do be sure to record your questions as we go throughout. So just very briefly about Energistics, many of you may be aware of us and what we do, but just in case you're not, we are a global nonprofit membership consortium that facilitates development and adoption of the standards that you saw displayed in the poll, RESQML, WIPSML, and ProdML. The key messages that we would really like you to take away today about Energistics is that we are member-funded, member-resourced standards development organization. We're not a vendor in the traditional sense. Also, the standards we steward have been developed by and for the industry. And it's important to understand that this really has not been an academic exercise. What we've done is work with the industry, with all of you, to figure out what are the key challenges you're attempting to address in your business, and then how can we, how can the standards that we develop help you address those challenges. So now we have second generation standards for all of our flagship standards, and now we're focusing on adoption to ensure that the industry benefits from the investment you've already made to develop them. And you know, when we talk about the industry, we really do have a global influence. And so you can see here many of the companies that have been working with us, some for decades, to develop these standards. And the logos that you see circled are companies that have been actively involved with RESQML, and most of them with Rescue prior to the development of RESQML. So, you know, 20+ years of concrete experience, both with standards and in the reservoir and earth modeling domain, have come to fruition, have developed these standards that you're going to be learning about today. And RESQML really, this is an exciting time because while it's the newest of the standards, it's shown a lot of promise already. Some key companies have adopted it and are actively using it today. And right now the numbers are small, but we really are hoping that this is going to start an influx of companies using the standard. And as I mentioned, it's the industry that actually develops these standards and then goes on to adopt them. And we do that at Energistics through our special interest groups, and in this case, the RESQML special interest group. So if you're interested in getting involved, whether it's to learn more about the standard, to actively test and work with it, or because you want to implement it within your own company, definitely get in touch with us, because this special interest group continues to meet, and really I think we're going to turn our attention more and more to developing communities of practice. So that's something to stay tuned for, and we'll learn more about that as we go along. So that'll be a new initiative. And I've mentioned our standards already, WITSML, PROTOML, and RESQML for drilling, production, and reservoir. What is notable now about this is that as of the end of 2016, we have next generation versions of all three standards that are now based on our common technical architecture. And what this means is that these standards, these schemas can be used in any combination along with the Energistics transfer protocol to address a variety of integrated operations, use cases, and workflows. And this is something that throughout the course of development, the RESQML team has always kept in mind what our other standards cover, and they don't want to reinvent the wheel, but incorporate aspects of the other standards to help address the workflows that they need to do. So I think that has been very forward-thinking of the group, and look forward to working with all of you and hopefully many other companies to realize the benefits of these standards now that they're out there. ETP is the Energistics Transfer Protocol. We just recently had a webinar about ETP, and we really think it's a game changer. It's replaced other APIs that grew up with the standards individually, and works with all three of our standards, our second generation standards. So if you're interested in learning about that, we have a video out on YouTube that was from a webinar done last week, and then we're also going to be rebroadcasting that webinar live later in June. So watch for announcements about that, and be sure to sign up if you're interested in learning more. So with that, I'm going to turn you over to Lisa so that she can tell you all about RESQML. So Lisa, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Jana. My involvement with RESQML has been since the inception of the Special Interest Group. And, you know, I knew it was several years, but I couldn't remember how many. So last night I looked through my files and found the proposal that we put together, and it had a June 2008 date on it. And so it's been a long time, and the reason that this is so important to talk about it today is because I've seen how it's evolved over the years, and it's a very exciting time for RESQML, particularly with the publication of version 2. And one of the reasons I have such a passion for it is because as a reservoir modeler myself, I can see how it's going to improve my reservoir modeling experience. And the main way it'll do that, I think, is by a reduction in cycle time of preparing all the data for building the models, and consequently it will allow me to spend more time on the model builds, incorporating a lot more around uncertainty and building more scenarios, and doing the model building is what I really should be doing, rather than messing around with data transfers so much of the time to prepare for those models. So it's an important time, and today what I'd like to do is to give you a taste of what this industry standard has to offer for all of us. So I personally am looking at it from the business perspective, but we'll talk about it in the broader perspective. So we'll start with what RESQML is. So RESQML, and I don't know what the background or knowledge of the people on the line is in terms of how much or how little you know about RESQML, so I'm just going to assume not much. So what RESQML is a data exchange standard. And I want to highlight the word exchange because it's not a database. It's about creating a standard to which we can write and read files by which we can transfer our data. And it was specifically designed for reservoir model data. And so it covers that entire reservoir modeling workflow, which is what you see here on this slide. So it starts with the interpretation, allows us to transfer data to build our structural frameworks, which you'll see some examples later on today, building our models and populating with properties, taking that data to a flow simulator, and then bringing that even back into the seismic interpretation space and making that loop all over again. Now the big change with RESQML is that it is based on XML format, and that is coupled with the HDF5 standard for large array data. And as Jana mentioned RESQ earlier, I think a lot of you will remember the RESQ format. In fact, some of you may still be using it. And the way I look at RESQML, it's essentially a next generation RESQ. Okay? So why, back in 2008 when we started this proposal, why did we recognize that we had to move to RESQML? And there were several pre-RESQML data exchange challenges. One of those was the inability to exchange certain data across applications without losing certain data or without big inefficiencies in moving that data. Particular data which had the most problems were things like sealed 3D frameworks and also unstructured grids. In addition to that, we weren't able to carry our coordinate reference systems or our project metadata. So things like what were our inputs into our model builds. All that was lost upon data transfer. Secondly, there was no way to preserve data relationships when making a round trip across applications. Now what I mean about a round trip essentially is when we export data from one application or move it out of one application, move into one or more applications, and then move it back into that original place. A lot of times when we did that, we would lose those valuable relationships. And that was particularly true for things like stratigraphic and structural frameworks, and also for linkages between our frameworks and our grids and our well data. So we needed a way to preserve that because it was becoming a big inefficiency. And then finally, there was no good format for archiving bundles, related interpretations and models and the business products that resulted from those. And that's important when we need to preserve what fed into our key decisions that we made with that bundle of data. So with RESQML, that's one thing that we'll be hearing about later on through some of these examples, is how we can bundle that and preserve some of that knowledge. So before we talk about some of the specifics around RESQML, what I'd like to do is address some of the business benefits. These, since they're business benefits, obviously benefit more so the operating companies. One of the things we recognize with RESQML is that we now have more flexibility in our choice of applications within our portfolio. And the reason why is because the data exchange standard greatly reduces the issues that are typically associated with working in a multiple application environment. And because we've reduced some of those issues and overcoming those issues, now we're able to transfer across multiple applications, which allows us to share data across multiple stakeholders who use different applications. So by multiple stakeholders, I mean it could be a geoscientist and an engineer within a single project team, or it could be another example of that is partner companies working across a single set of data with for a particular field. And then other additional benefits, which I'm not going to go into the details of those, but are around preservation of data integrity, characterization of uncertainties, in a way that we've never been able to do before, and capturing the inputs and some of the assumptions that were made during our workflows. Now, supporting those business benefits are a number of technical benefits. And so I'd like to elaborate on a few of those. First, we talked in the previous slide about the flexibility of the compute environment. And what this does with RESQML, we now are enabling a heterogeneous compute environment. And what this means is that we can share data across multiple applications from multiple vendors. We can develop on multiple technologies, and we can even exchange data across platforms like Linux and Windows. So we're not restricted or constrained by things like that. And then another key benefit, which I think is absolutely key, particularly for some of the software providers, is that we can now develop readers and writers to one single standard instead of having to develop n number of transfers to n number of applications. I think this is a huge benefit, and because the way I look at it is I would hope that the vendors would need to apply less resources for writing all of these n numbers of data transfers and can focus more on the capability of their applications themselves rather than focusing on how to get data in and out of the application. I find this very analogous to what I was talking about early on in my reservoir modeling sense of I should be building models and QCing them and validating them and updating them rather than moving the data around. So there are other technical benefits here. Not going to go through all of those. We'll highlight a few of them when we talk about some of the case examples and how RESQML will work for us. So let's put RESQML to work, and that's what I'm very anxious to do as a reservoir modeler. One of the reasons why is because I want to reduce the amount of errors and the amount of time I spend on data transfers. It is a problem right now, or in a pre-RESQML environment. In this example, and on the left-hand side in the image, you'll see a data set that was transferred in a pre-RESQML world. The image in the center that has the red surface is the horizon, and that, in this case, is the only thing that came across correctly. Everything else, the well positions were all bunched to the left-hand side of the AOI. The trajectories lost their depth reference, and the grid was flipped upside down upon transfer. And to be honest, this is not an uncommon thing. I've seen grids inverted in data transfers more times than I care to count on one hand. And these are the kind of things that take a lot of extra time, number one, to validate them, and then number two, if we find errors, then to have to correct those. So this is a big benefit of RESQML, that with the new standard and with things like incorporating coordinate reference systems, we'll be able to better overcome some of these challenges in data transfers. Now, one of the topics that is near and dear to my heart as a reservoir modeler is the integration of static and dynamic models. Now, the common workflow that I follow is to construct a geocellular reservoir model. I do so from a framework model that I've built either in that application or a different one, populate that with properties. Once I've done that, I export that grid, the well paths, the static properties, to a file or a set of files in a pre-RESQML world that then the reservoir engineer with whom I'm working can import into a simulation or into a reservoir simulator. They do history matching, performance prediction, output those data into a series of time step properties, and then export that to other files, and then I import that back into the geomodeling package. That all sounds great, and in an ideal world that would work without problems. And in a RESQML world, I think that will work in a much better way than in a pre-RESQML world. In a pre-RESQML world, we experienced all kinds of issues with that, more than I can elaborate on. One just example of that is that grid origins aren't all the same in a number of these applications. Some have them in one place, which makes for a right-handed grid. Other applications have them in a different corner, which makes for a left-handed grid. And what this will do is that this can affect our calculated volumetrics, which is a very scary thing, particularly when you think about the fact that it's not always visually obvious when we have these discrepancies. I've heard people say, oh, but I've QC'd the model and it looks just fine, but sometimes the looks don't capture these problems like these handedness differences. So RESQML was specifically designed and targeted at some of these static and dynamic integration issues. So it's done so by allowing us to carry more data types. So now, for example, we can carry things like blocked or upscaled wells from one application to another. May not sound like a big deal to you, but for me as a reservoir modeler, and when I couldn't do it, now it's a big deal that I can. Awareness of grid orientation is another big thing that RESQML can help us overcome. And then one big offering with the standard, which we've not been able to easily do before, is to have partial data transfers. And that's huge because that allows us to work a lot more iteratively across our disciplines if we don't have to re-export and carry the entire data set, but yet have that data set recognize essentially the children of it that come in from another application. And we talked about being able to preserve the input that went into a decision, and this is a great example of how RESQML can help us on that front. So since our reservoir models are often used for performance prediction and forecasting, it's important that we be able to defend those forecasts. And not only must we be able to defend our recommendations at the time that we make those decisions, but as per the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, we must retain supporting information for a field for 7 years after the life of that field or after abandonment. And that can be a huge challenge. Number one, sometimes we change applications over the course of either the life of the field or 7 years after it's been abandoned. Or even if we're still on the same application, many times applications progress and we have different versions, and sometimes those aren't backwards compatible. And so RESQML in its vendor neutral format can help us to overcome those challenges. So we're able, like we talked about earlier, to bundle the input data, some of the results, and some of the metadata that fed into those decisions. If you remember when we talked about in a pre-RESQML world, one of our biggest challenges was to transfer sealed 3D frameworks and retain the relationships between our horizons and faults and the results from those. And this is an example how RESQML has helped us overcome that as well. So it's not unusual that we use different software for building our 3D frameworks than we use for interpreting our seismic data or interpreting our seismic interpretations on the seismic data. And although it's not effortless, we would historically transfer our input horizons as individual objects, and then the framework would be built. And that part was, like I said, it wasn't effortless, but a bit straightforward. But then when we got to the sealed 3D framework and wanting to bring that back into the seismic interpretation to validate that, that was a much bigger effort. In fact, in some cases, it was not only a bigger effort, but we just could not preserve those relationships. We'd often have to bring it back across and rebuild it. Now, this is a great example. In this example, we've demonstrated with a real field data set, and the data is from Alwyn field, how they've moved the data from the seismic interpretation package which is SysMage, into SKUA, and built the framework within SKUA, and then moved that entire framework as a single bundle or a single package back into SysMage. And that's what you see on the bottom left-hand side is in the red lines, the red outlines. Those are the outlines of the framework superimposed on that one seismic line. I cannot tell you what a huge step forward this is in our workflows and what an enabler this is. And then the last example is something a bit less conventional, pardon the pun, and that's about the use of non-Cornerpoint simulation data and how we transfer that. So over time, our techniques to enhance our recovery from reservoirs has evolved. And for example, for unconventional reservoirs, we often use horizontal wells now to deplete those, and we drill these horizontal wells and hydraulically fracture those. And then for oil reservoirs, we're now injecting water into the reservoir for pressure support. And so as those have evolved, our reservoir simulators have evolved as well to accommodate these recovery techniques. So more specifically for the unconventionals, we now use unstructured grids for some of our hydraulically fractured wells and how to represent those. And then for some water floods, we now use streamlined data. They're quicker and easier to run than some of the traditional simulators. And so we run those to understand the effectiveness of water injection from the injector wells to the producer pairs. So the applications are now handling this data, and it's time for us to be able to transfer data between those applications, and that's what RESQML is now offering to us. So what I'd like to do is to summarize where we are now with RESQML v2 and what it can do for me as a reservoir modeler. So number one, it significantly improves my workflow all the way from seismic interpretation, from well log interpretation, through the geomodeling package into simulation, and then back around again to validate and start that process all over. It leverages, as Jana talked about, the Energistics Common Technical Architecture and the other ML standards such as WITSML and ProdML to support more integrated operations. And then by doing that, we can now enable integrated decision-making across our multiple stakeholders, whether it be on a particular field team or across field partners. You know, a key one is that it preserves our data integrity throughout the asset lifecycle, and what that data integrity helps not only in terms of is not only in terms of cycle time for me as a reservoir modeler, but if you think about it, it helps us with safer operations because of the integrity around our positioning of our data. We now have more flexibility in our compute environment such that we can work across multiple vendors, technologies, and platforms more easily. And so that allows us more flexibility in how we work. RESQML v2 is stable. It provides us with robust functionality, and it's also extensible and can support new capabilities as they are developed. So one thing I'm very happy to say is that it's now available from some of the software vendors that you've seen highlighted on the slide that Jana showed, and many of those other software vendors have it on their roadmap anywhere from delivering it this year all the way into 2019. So it's a very exciting time. I cannot wait to use it in anger across a number of applications. So what's next for RESQML? So for the operators on the call, what I would ask of you is to explore how the standard, how RESQML can help you achieve your company objectives. So talk with your vendors. Ask them specifically about how they've implemented it or how it's on their roadmap. And then vendors, what we would ask of you is to enhance your products and your services and embrace the adoption of RESQML so that then we start to see this working across the industry as we envisioned even back in 2008 when we first started on this journey. So for more information, contact Energistics at the email address that you see here, or you can contact Jana or Jay. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Jana, and we'll, I think, open it up to Q&A.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lisa. Well, hopefully this has given you a taste of the promise and potential of RESQML, and you're already thinking about how you can use RESQML in your organization. And I realize it's probably a little premature to say for sure, but just a little quick poll question to ask you, based on what you've learned today, do you think you'd be interested in using RESQML back in your shop, whether you're a vendor who would be enhancing your products and services with it, or you are from an operating company and thinking about how you can meet the various business challenges that you're faced with every single day? Or even, we may even have a regulatory agency on the phone, and who knows, maybe you're thinking about how you can be getting data from operators about the fields that you are responsible for. So let us know. Also, I want to remind you that the handout of this presentation is available for download, so by all means do take advantage of that. And again, we will be posting the recording of it as well. So I'm going to go ahead and close this and share. And 88% of respondents are saying that they're interested. So Lisa, well done. Did a good job. Okay, so let us, just as a reminder of your control panel here where you can be asking your questions. And while you're thinking about what you want more information about, I want to welcome two other people to our webinar. Laurent Denis from Paradigm. Laurent's been involved with Rescue and now RESQML for, I don't know how many years, many. He's a key technical contributor. He's led our technical team. He's been on our executive team for a number of years as the vice chair, and really is an amazing resource for all things technical. I'd also like to welcome Jay Hollingsworth. He's the Energistics Chief Technology Officer. He's joining us actually from Stavanger, Norway. And Jay's been in the industry for a very long time, 20 years with mobile, 10 with Schlumberger. He's worked with Oracle and Halliburton, and finally saw the light and came and joined us here at Energistics. And I think one of the most notable accomplishments is that we had envisioned an integrated family of standards that all work together on a common technical architecture and foundation. And it was when Jay came on board to lead our all of our people from the industry who have been involved that we've actually seen that come to fruition. So he also is a resource for you. So with that, I'm going to take a look and see what questions we have. Alrighty, let me just give me a moment here so I can make this a little bigger on my screen. Okay. All right, we're just doing a little move around here so that we can see. All right. All right, so one of our questions is referring to slide 17, second point, and since we have that, I'm going to go back to, see if I can get back to slide 17 so that people know what the question's actually referring to. Bear with me here. Okay, so this is the archive case. And the question is, retention of the full supporting data set is required for the life of fields, then another 7 years after abandonment or disposal. Which jurisdiction is that in, or is that part of the SOX Act Rule 2? Thank you.
My understanding is that part of the Sarbanes-Oxley requirement.
Okay. And our next question is, nice overview. I understand the RESQML API is in .NET. Are there existing good methods for handling RESQML format with Python bindings? That sounds like a Laurent or Jay question.
So first, RESQML is not technically an API, just for a transfer format. So you can use you can develop your own API to write and read this format. Then there is a dev kit that exists from the first version of RESQML that is indeed in .NET, but there is some open source API. One worth mentioning is called FES API, and it's an API that is developed in C++ and has binding in Java, .NET, and I will imagine that it will be easy to extend this API to make a Python wrapping around it. So I don't know any Python binding yet, but I think it may be quite easy to do.
Okay, great, thank you, Laurent. All right, next question, Alberto Puyo from Pemex, and disculpe if I pronounce your last name incorrectly. Congratulations, great presentation. The question is, do you think it's important to start forming specialists not only in oil engineering but also data management knowledge combined? Thoughts?
I'm assuming you mean in terms of technical individuals that have both, yeah, well, you can't, I can't ask a question and then respond, can I?
No.
Okay, I'll just make an assumption
Well,
that you're assuming.
they can always
Can you
respond
repeat the
back
question, Hannah? Let me make sure I understand it.
So, and for those on the call, if you want to elaborate on a question or in response to anything that's said, by all means, you can type into the questions and we'll see your response as well. So again, the question is, do you think it's important to start forming specialists not only in oil engineering but also data management knowledge combined?
Okay. I think I see what you're asking, and so I don't, at least from my perspective, I don't know if we would have to form the specialists, but I do think it's important that we have that data management expertise within all of our companies, and so it's important how it's done, is if it's a particular specialist or not. I think just having that expertise within the company is the most important part.
Yeah, and just from an Energistics perspective, you know, I talked earlier about we're now looking at, so we've worked traditionally in a special interest group format, and that will continue on both for continued development as well as adoption efforts. But we're also looking at a framework for creating communities of practice. And I see that as a little bit different from the SIGs in the sense that this would be an opportunity for companies to come together and share their lessons learned and their experiences in maybe more of an open forum and hopefully learn from one another. And again, we're just internally starting to explore this idea, but you know, bringing that expertise, whether it's into the community of practice and or into the SIG, whether it's the reservoir specialists or and data management, but seeing how, having them working together and seeing how those areas fit together is always a good idea. So I would definitely encourage that, and you know, also would encourage companies maybe who weren't necessarily involved in the development but now are now seeing that they could really realize the benefits in their companies. Development always continues, but it's as the companies are actually adopting that you start realizing the benefits, but also where new challenges are arising. Now that you've addressed, you know, once you can address the 80% that are causing you angst every day, now what else can you do? So that will always continue. Do you have any thoughts on that question, Laurent, that you wanted to add? Okay. All right. So another comment is, would it be fair to say that unlike RESQML, which is for the transfer of streams of certain types of data, RESQML is exclusively for the transfer of snapshots of sets of bespoke data? In this respect, it can be used not just to transfer models, but also to archive them. If so, the question of the compatibility of RESQML and PPDM is a legitimate one. Has this been taken into account from the start, or is this planned for the future, including through ETP or otherwise. So that seems like a good question for Jay, if you have any thoughts on this as both.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So in fact, PPDM doesn't hold a lot of this stuff. PPDM isn't really designed to hold grids and faults and a lot of Earth model representations. PPDM obviously could hold trajectories and the well and a lot of other things that RESQML integrates with. So because they kind of don't overlap in the preservation of the computer science representations of those Earth model things, we didn't really worry collectively about that. Laurent, you connect to PPDM. Do you have any comment about that?
Yeah, I mean there is very few objects in the RESQML database, in the RESQML transfer that are related to PPDM objects. I mean a lot of what we are doing in interpretation, modeling, reservoir are not domains that are extensively covered by PPDM. So there is not the well part. Yes, of course we can transfer most of what PPDM is storing, and something to consider since the question as an ETP component is that RESQML is a format that is currently file-based, but because it's very suitable to be transferred directly through other mechanism, and of course ETP will be the next mechanism of transfer. So you could perfectly discover what is available in a PPDM database through an ETP discovery mechanism. And what will be transferred can either be with ML, like it is implemented currently, or could be in a RESQML format for the object that requires a RESQML format.
And I think one of the things that's important about what Laurent just said is that makes it more of a live model transfer, because I heard the term snapshot in the question, and that's true for something like this where we're talking about archival, but it's not only, I don't want folks to think that it's only limited to being a snapshot, that the way you were just describing it is being implemented, it's more live.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because historically, I think the view of reservoir and Earth model data, if I recall the history correctly, is that it was seen as more of a snapshot in time. But I can remember for the last several years, one of our consistent contributors over time, who many of you may know, a guy named Bill McKenzie from Chevron, has been saying to the RESQML community, you need an API. You don't know it yet, but trust me, you do. And I think actually that companies are coming around to that idea, and that's why they're starting to look very seriously at ETP and transferring the models using ETP, which is for real-time data transfer as well as other times. So, and in fact, I know Paradigm has been doing a fair amount of work on that, and might as well put in a little plug. We'll be doing a webinar in July, at the end of July, to talk about how they have implemented RESQML with ETP. So stay tuned for that. Once we know it's all solidified, we'll be happy to help advertise it for you, Laurent. And also, just on just to say, with respect to PPDM, Energistics and PPDM have worked together over time for many years in different ways, and I think that if there is a community of people in the industry who use PPDM today and who are using RESQML for data transfer, that it's always worth bringing up to both companies what it is you would like to be able to do, because even if the data model, the PPDM data model, doesn't today support the depth of information that you may want to store and that you're now capable of transferring, they continue to do development as well. So it would be always worth keeping in touch with those organizations. We do work together, and we share common set of customers, so to speak. So by all means, stay in touch in that regard. Okay, so another question is, are there standard data sets to test our API implementations on? So we do have some data sets that have been contributed by members, but they are not available to the public. So essentially, a benefit of membership, if you're ever wondering, well, if the standards are available to me, why should I join Energistics? Well, one good reason to join Energistics is because sometimes there are contributions that are made for the benefit of the community to do development and other work, but they are not made publicly available for whatever reason. That is the prerogative of the donating company. So one of the examples that was shown referenced a transfer, a round-trip transfer that had been done by Total using Paradigm and Schlumberger and some other applications, and that was using the Alwyn data set, and that data set is available to members who are working with us here at Energistics. There may be other data sets available out there in the public domain. I think we'd be using them more extensively if we could. So, but I don't know, Jay, do you know of any that are out there?
Not that have been put into RESQML format. The only test data sets we have that would be available to the public would be small test data sets that were generated to test data exchanges. But as far as I'm aware, no one has taken any of the big public data sets like the old the New Zealand data set or the old Teapot Dome data set, which doesn't have a lot of geoscience data. A lot of the popular public domain data sets, as far as I know, no one's really put those into RESQML format. Laurent might have done some work on one of those, but do you have anything that's public?
No, there's simple examples that are providing with a schema, but nothing of this side now.
However, we're always on the lookout for data sets, so for those of you here, if you have data sets that you're willing to share, maybe anonymize them, we absolutely would welcome that. That's something that we are always looking to do, regardless of the standards that we're working with. Okay, yes, I will share. Well, certainly, if you need to get in touch with any of the people that are on this call today, you can send an email to us at info@energistics.org, and we'll definitely connect you up. I'm also happy to provide direct email addresses for Jay and I to, when I send a follow-up email informing you that the webinar has been posted. Okay, do you have an approximate count on the number of applications that now read and write RESQML, and how much divergence has been seen in the individual implementations? So I don't have a count. The companies that you saw on the logo slide that are circled, most of them either have implemented or are implementing RESQML into their applications. Exactly when they're doing it may not be known yet, at least publicly. And from an Energistics perspective, we don't share roadmap information of the companies. It's not, we look at that as, we don't want to speak for you. We rely on companies to speak for themselves. I certainly do know of companies that have implemented today. GeoCirrus and Paradigm and IFP all have worked on applications and are actively using RESQML today. Schlumberger, Halliburton, CMG, Dynamic Graphics, Rockstar, which is Emerson, and a number of others all have been involved in the development of RESQML and are in varying stages of implementation. So I would encourage you, if you have contacts within those companies and any of the others that you saw circled on the slide, by all means do contact them and ask them your questions or let them know that you're interested in RESQML. I strongly encourage that.
And concerning the second point about divergence, I mean, one of the things we put in place since the beginning of RESQML is the notion of iLab, where all the vendors gather 3 times a year to test among themselves. So we try to limit the divergence by putting everybody in the same place and try to exchange among each other to make sure that that we are compatible. So also RESQML allow extension, we try to limit those, and when we need some specific extension, we try to, as quickly as possible, standardize them by proposing to agree on the same way of doing things. And that's what, it's not perfect, but we are trying to converge, to reconverge as much as possible during these iLabs.
Okay, thanks, Laurent. All right, so another question. I understand that RESQML supports partial data transfer. Does RESQML support merging of 2 models? Does it support extracting part of the data from RESQML model? Does it support extracting part of the grid and grid relating data? Okay, so there's a lot to that.
What were the 3? Merge 2
So
models,
merging 2 models,
extract a part.
extract part of the data from the RESQML model, and support extracting part of the grid and grid relating data.
The answer is yes to all of the above. So the transfer allow indeed transfer of part of the model and allow you to incorporate part of another model into the model that is currently in your application. However, RESQML is not providing you any code or API to do the actual merge. It's just providing you the standard format on which the information required to be able to make a successful change is provided. But it's up to the application to decide how they want to actually do the merge, resolve conflict, and everything that is associated with partial data transfer or loop of transfer. So there's no miracle. The application will still have to do some part of the work of merging, but each application will have its own logic, so it's a good thing.
Yeah, Laurent, I would add to that some of the RESQML is specifically designed to cover the various kinds of identification that popular applications use to enable applications to be able to merge different things together. You know, some applications use a single GUID, some applications like to use a pair of GUIDs, and RESQML specifically allows transfers of all of those things to enhance the likelihood that an application would be able to merge multiple things together. You might want to comment on that.
No, I mean, yes, it's part of the format. I don't have anything else to add.
Okay. All right, so this last call for any questions. Wanted to let you know, I guess, a couple of things. One is that if you are planning to go to EAGE EuroPac in June, just in a couple of weeks from today, there is going to be a presentation about RESQML in one of the sessions, and I can't remember exactly which session it is, but if you go, be on the lookout for that. And there's also a workshop that will be on June 16th, immediately following EAGE. So it's the day after EAGE ends, but that will be all about reservoir modeling, and will include a fair amount of discussion around the standards. Jade, I know, is going to be there. It's being led by people from Total. Total's been a big implementer of adopter, first mover on the use of RESQML. So it's really worth your time if you're going to be at the conference to watch for that presentation during the regular sessions, and then consider attending the workshop afterward. Also, in December of 2016, we did a webinar that was featuring Total and Paradigm around transferring large numbers of well data to using RESQML. So I encourage you to go out to the Energistics website. You can get the link to that webinar, which was recorded and posted on YouTube. So be sure to take a look for that as well. And what else? I guess that's about it for the moment. If you want more information about ETP, which was discussed, the Energistics Transfer Protocol, if you look on our website under Standards Portfolio, there's a link to Energistics Transfer Protocol. You can get more information. And if you're interested in learning about tools that have been developed to support implementation, whether it's the standards dev kit that we manage here or other applications that have been dev kits and toolkits that have been donated by the member community, you can find links to those on our website. One of them has been used fairly extensively, actually. It's called SESAPI, S-E-S-A-P-I, and they've used that within Total. I think Paradigm's used it as well, and I know some other companies have also used it to help with their implementation. So you can find information about that and a link to it. It was donated by a French company called F2I Consulting, and there's a link to it where it's made available in a, it's not on Bitbucket, which is what we traditionally use because it's within France at the moment, but you can link to it from our website as well. So with that, we do have, there's a comment about online courses, workshops, and training. We do offer training for RESQML. We've scheduled a couple times a 2-day course here in Houston that we haven't had a lot of take-up on that, but maybe now we'll start seeing more interest. And we are always enhancing our training capabilities, so keep an eye out for that. Right now we're very focused on instructor-led training at the moment, but over time, you know, we hope to make more types of training available, or, you know, and certainly doing more of these kinds of webinars and maybe having more technically oriented ones. We're focusing right now on getting the word out about RESQML, for example, but, you know, if there's interest, then we can look at other kinds of webinars that are kind of bite-sized but more targeted to developers. And we'll just stay tuned. You know, we know travel can be difficult. We do try to do some things overseas, and we also have worked with companies individually to offer training. So, you know, to keep those kinds of things in mind. At the end of this webinar, you'll see a very brief survey. 5 questions, won't take you long, but please do take a few seconds to complete it because it's going to help us with our planning for future webinars and really anything else that you want to tell us, by all means do. So with that, we are just about at the end of our time. We're going to see if we have any more questions. We don't. So thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you, Lisa and Laurent and Jay. Really appreciate your time and effort to put this forward. And watch for upcoming webinars, whether it's about RESQML or otherwise. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.